So today we have Dr. Bachman from Cal State LA, who is a mechanical engineering assistant professor. He also does research in what do you do research?
Oh my God, you didn't even do research.
I'm not ready.
Electrochemistry.
I told you.
Electrochemistry. Okay. Electrochemistry. And he's also the advisor for SAE at our school. So he advises both Baja and our formula team. Anything else you want to introduce yourself as, Bachman? What else on the...
I do the senior design, run the makerspace.
Oh yeah, the makerspace. So we have a space on campus where people can machine and, create projects as they please. So that's fun. That was cool.
Yeah. So to kind of get into it a little bit, sort of start off is, we mentioned Bachman covers SAE at our school, part of the makerspace as well as a professor, but kind of want to know a little bit of a background before you came to Cal State LA.
Really?
So just kind of walk us through a little bit of how you started, how you kind of chose, like, this is what I want to do, engineering, and how your path moving forward and how you ended up at Cal State LA.
Yeah, start all the way like from your undergrad, like as a college student, like how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I go a little further back. I mean, I was like one of those classic kids in the back to class. If you guys remember that, like How Things Work book with the mammoths and the cavemen, and like explained how, hey, you guys haven't seen this? It kind of explains how helicopters and rockets work to like 5-year-olds. So I just like sat and loved that book, basically, and learned as much as I can. I feel like that was like very natural part of my personality was I want to know like how things work and I want to know how I can make it. And so the other thing I kind of did growing up was sports. That was probably my biggest passion and pretty much spent all my time doing that. The only other thing I think that kind of led into the engineering is I used to really like cars. It was kind of one of the things I worked on a lot along with my parents' house. And so we built a couple cars in high school with my dad, just kind of for fun. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we were learning along the way. So I think that kind of led going into undergrad I was never great at English. I actually had to take remedial English courses. That's
an engineering theme, it seems like.
Yeah, totally. It was embarrassing. They weren't even held on campus at UCSD. I had to walk like 30 minutes over to this like little building, and they had to teach me like, what a verb was and what a noun was. Yeah, because I was in Spanish immersion for the first kindergarten through 6th grade, so I only spoke, for the most part, Spanish. So my English was not very good, even though both my parents were writers. And so I think that was one of the reasons also I kind of had a physics and specifically a physics lean, even more than chemistry and bio going into high school. But yeah, so I think like a lot of mechanical engineers are like, well, I kind of like cars. I don't know exactly what a mechanical engineer does, but supposedly they work on cars. So I kind of started there. And honestly, my first couple years, I was still very into sports. I played a lot of hockey there. I played lacrosse. I played on the private team that played throughout the Western states, kind of the, LA, San Diego, Sacramento, Salt Lake City, Texas, Arizona, each had a team basically. And so I'd fly on the weekends and go play hockey. You play a Friday, Saturday, Sunday stint every weekend. Then I'd come back and trying to work on the plane and stuff. So I spent a lot of time doing that. It was nice because we were a Sacramento-based team, oddly enough. And so I flew home a lot to Sacramento, and that's when I hung out with my wife a lot, actually, was on the weekend. So it was kind of like a lot of free trips to hang out with my wife. So eventually I even left school for a bit, and then I tried to play ice hockey kind of in a semi-pro capacity in Canada for a bit before I learned that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, or at least didn't get to the point where I wanted to be. I was hoping eventually just to at least play some like NCAA Division I. I didn't really want to play Division III that much. It wasn't wasn't a big draw to me, I guess. And so I wasn't going to move across the country. All my family's in California. So I wasn't really going to do a big change just to play Division III. But so that never worked out for me. But it was interesting. So I came back about halfway through undergrad, and I pretty much knew what I wanted to do at that point. I knew I wanted to be a teacher. My jobs were always coaching sports as a kid. Basically, I think maybe ages like 13 through 20, I was either a camp counselor or I was coaching sports, and the camps were sports camp. So I kind of knew I liked to teach. But I kind of knew like teaching sports was not a great career. So I wanted to go to teaching, and I actually went back and forth between, did I want to do high school? Did I want to do college for a while? And so in the end, I kind of always just want to keep my options open. So I was like, well, I might want to do college. So I'm going to need to go get a master's and PhD. And so at that point, I basically just kind of stuck in school. I studied hard because I knew I wanted to get my PhD. But I was always interested. I've always found my just technical stuff interesting. And so that's kind of what led me into it, into teaching eventually.
Okay, like during your undergrad, were you an athlete doing engineering already, or were you still like thinking that you were going to be an athlete for like a good while? Like, what were you studying at the same time that you were an athlete?
No, I was in engineering, so I was in ME. It was definitely a backup though. It was like
you're in ME doing a ton of athletics. That sounds hard.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky, I guess, overall in that, like, I feel like I had a pretty good school system, and I was exposed to a lot of physics and I didn't actually do that much calculus, but I was exposed to a lot of physics and math, and so it was much easier, I think, than my peers who probably weren't as exposed to as much physics and math before this, and so it was definitely hard. I'm also a good brown noser. That gets you pretty far in your first couple of years of school, I feel like. So yeah.
Were you brown
kind of made it work.
Professors?
Yeah, pretty much anybody. Your TAs, I mean, if you know what they're looking for, it makes your life pretty easy. But yeah, so I was definitely, engineering was second until I basically came back, and then it flipped. And then I played ice hockey through my master's, and I coached the team actually towards the end of my master's. And so it basically was still a big part of my life, but it really flipped in priorities after that.
You decided you were going to become a teacher. That's when your focus kind of shifted more to the engineering. Like you took it a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, totally. I was like, all right, I'm gonna be the best in this class now. It wasn't as much like, all right, I'm gonna do what it takes just to get by, basically. So kind of, which was, and then it was kind of the opposite in sports. It was always like, all right, I want to be the best, on the field at all times, right? And now it was like, all right, I just want to go out, I want to have fun, I want to hold my own. But I wasn't gonna go to the gym twice a day, or anything like that.
Yeah, you brought up like, for those of you that don't, Krystal had mentioned, Bachman has been our advisor for Baja for the last 2 or 3 years, at least my last 2 or 3 years at Cal State LA. And you mentioned a lot of things that we've talked about beforehand, aside from this podcast. But what I didn't know is that when you coached a lot of these teams, and that kind of makes sense now. Like a lot of the ways that you approached our Baja team, since before we didn't have an advisor at all. Like, or I guess we had an advisor which signed up.
We did, but they were more like on paper. Yeah, they were just like
But it definitely makes a lot more sense now that you coach teams, because I think the way you sort of interact with us, it's very much like a team, and it definitely feels that way, which is, I don't know, I thought it was interesting. I just put 2 and 2 together. I'm like, yo, that's crazy. That makes sense now.
I actually didn't know that you coached teams. I know that you played and that you played a ton of hockey, but I didn't know that you actually coached a bunch of teams while you were in school.
Yeah. No, I think, a lot of my approach to stuff is because of just, I don't have a lot of, a bulk share of my experience in life comes from that, right? So you approach things in the way you approach you have to modify, but so yeah. There's definitely differences, but I think just kind of the aspect of a good team is very, very similar in a way. I think just kind of aspect of like really taking care of like the other members of your team and kind of the trust that's built on the team, I think works in a lot of scenarios. Yeah.
So then when you were doing your PhD, tell us about the research that you did for your PhD, like your thesis and like that kind of background of what your research is in.
Yeah. So yeah, well, it's kind of funny. My research kind of started with my passion with cars. Undergrad, I did a lot of biomechanics. That's where I basically started always working in machine shops because I was good. I was kind of an auto shop kid and metal shop and wood shop kid in high school. You know, took those 2 or 3 times, and so I could work in a machine shop. So that was like my jobs to start, and then I started. Actually, my best professor, or at least in my opinion, my best professor was my machine design professor in undergrad. Like I just took that class and I just soaked like every word he said basically. So I asked to do research with him just because I was like, all right, this is the coolest, you know, the most interesting person I've met in my life, right? Like, all right, I can just hang out with this person a little more. So I was doing research with him, but he did biomechanics, something I wasn't really all that interested in at the start. How do you replace your knee? How do you do ACL reconstruction? But, you know, if you could build something, I think you can get along pretty well anywhere, you know, even in a highly theoretical space, there's always some testing that needs to be done. And we were more on the testing side. And then I did a lot of atmospheric boundary layer wind tunnel stuff, which is basically like a wind tunnel, but you do it on the surface of the earth. So you try and mimic how the air flows on the surface of the earth. But going into my master's, I kind of knew, like, I always liked cars. It's like, what's the latest and greatest in cars? And so I did fuel cell cars was kind of the latest and greatest at the time. This was in the mid 2000s. Arnold Schwarzenegger was talking about the hydrogen highway. You know, George W. Bush was all about hydrogen. And so I was doing that for a bit. And I mean, I don't want to talk a ton about hydrogen, but I kind of said, like, you know, I think batteries is probably a more realistic. It's going to be more widespread and it's going to be more realistic coming sooner. And so the other big thing I noticed was, like, as a mechanical engineer, out of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics and like system level stuff. And it was like like a lot of like our systems these days, like, require good engineering there, but like they're fundamentally limited by what material you have. And so, like, you can only engineer so much out of the material basically. And then in the end, you're limited by the material. And so it's like, if you want to make a 2 or 3-fold increase in the performance of batteries to make them, you know, more friendly towards passenger vehicles, you need to do materials. And so I went to MIT, and kind of what I wanted to study was materials for electrochemistry, which is like batteries. Could also include electrochemistry, could include fuel cells and supercapacitors too. But and so that's what I researched. I was really away from my manufacturing background where I built stuff. You know, I built some test cells and stuff, but that was like those 5 years where I spent very little time manufacturing things, which I had been pretty much doing throughout all my other career. And so and we did some projects with kind of BMW. And we had a lot of just very collaborative projects with folks from like Georgia Tech and Harvard, which is right next to MIT, or, you know, Tokyo Institute of Technology. So that was really cool. I mean, the best part about grad school is you just meet a lot of interesting folks, a lot of people who are good thinkers, and you kind of see different ways to think about things and how people approach problems, right? And so that was my favorite part about it. And a lot of my closest friends these days are folks that I met on our pub crawl, you know, when I was looking at different universities. So I kind of moved away from a little bit, but it was all kind of car related in the end, basically, oddly enough.
You didn't feel like a need to sort of move into like the automotive industry? Like you mentioned, you worked with like BMW and stuff like that. So you weren't like, oh man, I want to work on chassis, or I want to work on, I don't know, how to building these cars and stuff. Like that wasn't something you wanted to do.
It's funny when you get like a scientist, you get like a total big head. You're like that's just some engineering. Like anybody can Anybody can do some of those calculations, run some FEA, do some CFD, like they'll figure that out, right? Like this is the problem. Like the problem is the battery, right? Like
Like
all that
what
other
we
stuff is just chump stuff, like.
You calling us chumps, Bachman?
No, that's your as a scientist though. That's what you kind of that's the kind of the some of the thoughts sometimes when you haven't done as much of the engineering, So yeah, and so you're a little bit oblivious to. And you're always oblivious to what you don't know, right? So a lot of times you assume things are easy. But so yeah, no, it was kind of like this is the key. It was like when you feel like, hey, this is the key problem. I'm devoting my time to the key problem, right? I didn't feel as much drawn, and I always wanted to be a teacher, right? So in the end, the research was all secondary to me. It was like I want to go back to California and I want to teach in the system in California. So it's kind of like it wasn't a big draw, but and BMW too. We were working with their like R&D department, which was just I think their main motivation was they just didn't want to be blindsided. They wanted to know, they don't want to figure out, oh, Toyota has been developing this for 10 years and we're 10 years behind, right? It's like they want to know what's out there, what are the potential ways to go in the future. So like much of the stuff we did with them is not going on a car. It's basically so that they can build their knowledge base and that they're not missing some, key technical area, related to vehicles, basically.
Like whatever you guys discovered, they just wanted to be the first to do it.
Yeah, I think first to do it. I think but to be honest, like most of that research stuff is totally glorified. I mean, especially at a university level. It's like I had been in batteries for like 3 years, maybe at this point. It's like, how you have to be pretty brilliant to be 3 years in to be like doing cutting edge stuff, right? Like there's people at Sony and Panasonic who've been doing batteries for 40, 50 years, right? Like they made the last generation. So it's like, there's very few people I think so I think a lot of the university, it's still people development, you're developing good minds. You're thinking about interesting problems, but it's still not, for me, it wasn't like, it was more about they just want to be in the field, right? So they're writing papers, they're reading other papers, they're going to conferences. So they kind of know the landscape. They can put some papers on their name. They can figure out some cool things. But it was like, my research wasn't even like, oh, let's find the next best material. It was basically like, what are the key things about the material that make it good or make it bad, right? So, because once you know, like, oh, like this type of atom is always going to have high performance because of this, then it's like there's an infinite number of materials. So that quickly like narrows it down so you can actually think like, all right, these are the key things you need. Oh, these building blocks are the things that have that. Like, let's start with that area, right? So for most of mine, it was actually kind of figuring out what's good and what's bad and then helping people actually design the stuff. So I wasn't as much of like, oh, I'm just going to go, try and necessarily find the best thing. It was more about understanding.
So you're doing all this research with these big name people. How did you end up at Cal State LA specifically? Because I feel like our school is kind of like, they're seen as a bit of more of like it's a local school. You hear it all the time, it's a commuter school, right? So why Cal State LA?
Right.
Yeah, why not like UCLA, USC? I mean, PhD from MIT. I would imagine someone like you would be like UCLA or something. Like why Cal State LA?
Yeah, it depends on your priorities, right? It's like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to work at a very prestigious school? It's going to be easy to get money. I mean, you're going to get students who have a ton of physics and calculus experience, right? It's going to be very easy for them, and chemistry experience. It's going to be easy for them to pick up on these topics, right? And think extremely high level, right? Which is cool, but it's like, I don't know, Cal State is also cool. It's like, all right, you have a lot of students who are very motivated, they're not entitled. They want to like do something important, right? So I don't know, like I feel like that was like a great place to be a teacher, right? As opposed to just like, oh, I'm going to be with a bunch of people who took every AP class already and we're just going to talk about the most advanced calculus. It's like, I don't know, that's not as exciting to me as like, all right, let's like talk about the fundamentals. Let's take people like a lot of like really like important steps rather than like, oh, let's just talk about stuff that not a lot of people actually will ever use or anything like that, right? And the motivation's cool too, right? I mean, people who are motivated, they have a big reason to, do well in school and learn things. So yeah, I mean, so I interviewed a lot of places. I knew I wanted to go to a CSU. So USCI had a teaching position, like they made these new positions at the UCs where you're more of a teacher than a researcher. Where usually it's kind of flipped. You're a little bit more of a researcher there than you are a teacher. So I had offers at like UCI, Cal State LA, Fullerton, San Jose State. But yeah, I really like the department at Cal State LA. I mean, that's big. Kind of who do you work with day to day? Who are your bosses, right? They're going to control a lot of what you're going to be able to do, right? So I really, enjoyed kind of the vision of our dean and our chair and meeting my colleagues, right? I think they had a similar vision for what a good education would be, right? And so it's like, all right, that's a cool space to be in. And
well, you felt like you were going to have more of an impact there.
Totally. And I would have people who support me with that impact, right? Where I go to a place, some other school that doesn't really prioritize teaching, right? And I'm just going to be the maverick there, like trying to push this, agenda that no one else is interested in. Like, I'm just going to be hitting my head on a wall all day, right? It's like you go to a place where everyone's driving towards the same thing. It's like, that's really, and I see it today, right? If we go to like a teaching and learning academy on campus, it's like mostly, if like there's of the engineers, it's like 90% MEs, right? I think we have like kind of a special department in that we have like a lot of people who are really interested in doing a good job teaching. Not to say that you can't get better and we don't have a lot of people who aren't doing as good as most students would hope, but I think just in terms of what I've experienced, a lot of people who are kind of really, really into doing a good job for the students, which is kind of refreshing.
Right. I think you made the right choice, to be quite honest with you. Like you've been a part of Cal State LA for like almost 4 years now, I would say. Like such a short amount of time, and the amount of stuff that you've been able to do on campus is like, especially with things like the makerspace, like that wasn't even a thought at Cal State LA, like, or even like having an advisor at SA, like that wasn't even a good advisor, wasn't even a thought in SA. And you coming in just in your first couple years, in your first few years at Cal State LA, like you built like so much. And like you said, like I definitely see you as like the maverick at Cal State LA. And I haven't seen professors move mountains like you did.
Yeah, kind of go out of their way.
But it's true. It's true.
Yeah, go out of their way to like really get in touch with the students and like see what they're up to and like how you can help them accomplish those things. Like that's definitely been a big thing. But fun fact, I think you started in 2017 or 2016. 2017. That's the year I transferred.
3 years on the dot, like almost today.
Oh yeah.
I started in August 2017. Yeah. No, I mean, like, so a lot of stuff that's possible is because the dean and the chair and your colleagues support you doing this stuff too, right? I think a lot of it is like my instincts as a coach was like, you need to know the people, and as a teammate, right? You need to know your teammates well. You need to know them beyond just what's relevant to the actual team, even a little bit, to understand them. And so I think you're just able to give better advice. You're able to interact with them in a way that's more efficient and just more fruitful in general. So I've kind of always had that approach. And that was one of the other reasons too, is like, I don't want to go into some class with like 300 people, right? Like I can just sit at home and record those, right? Which like, like in the long run, I want to be in a class with like 30 people, their names, what their strengths are, areas where you can really help them out, and so I don't know, it makes it more enjoyable. And I think there's some personal aspect to it. And I think in general, there's better gains. You learn more as a teacher and you learn more as a student when there's some personal aspect to it.
So one of the things that you started recently was doing senior design for Cal State LA. And you said that you had experience kind of doing projects with other schools and stuff like that. So how does Cal State LA's senior design compare to that? Do you know like what kind of projects they do? Because I know like as far as Baja goes, a lot of schools do it very differently. For some people, like building the car is like an entire senior design project, and only the people who are in that that project in their senior design are the people who work on the car. Versus we have like a lot of just like freshmen. We have like anybody and everybody who wants to work on the car can do it. It's like pretty open, but we do also have like special senior design projects more recently for Baja that are kind of just like subsections or like specific areas that we feel like we can build a project on. So like how do other schools just like how do their programs compare to ours, and like how do the students do in senior design?
Yeah, I mean there's a range. I mean I can talk talk a little bit of my experience and kind of our sister school UCLA a little bit. Like my experience was kind of funny. So I was at Davis by the time I was doing my fifth year. And so they similar thing. They have like a list of projects, and we asked for projects. And the guy that I really liked in machine design had a project for testing, cow knees or human knees to check how the implants are working, right? And it was a little project about doing some strain gauges and measuring them and using that as a feedback to control the motion. As well as some displacement sensors. But it was kind of funny since I didn't really like, to be honest, I didn't really think the project was all that interesting, but I liked the professor. And so a lot of my decisions are based on like, I'm going to work with someone who's like, I'm going to learn from, rather than just pick the project that sounds the coolest. So I picked that project, but no one else in the class picked the project. And so the teacher said well, do you still want to do it if like you're alone? And I was like, yeah, it sounds good. So I actually had a senior design project I did by myself. It was like like when I think back on it now, it's like, well, I don't know what they were thinking when they let me do that. I was a part of a lab.
Design team. That's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, a senior design single person team. But I was a part of their lab, right? So I had some people I could talk to about. There wasn't actually that many people in the lab. I ended up working full time in the lab between that and grad school, and I was like the only person in the lab for a bit there. It was kind of interesting. But yeah, and then I know like UCL, but theirs was okay. And then UCLA's, for example, they just all get together in teams and they build like a dancing robot, right? Which has a lot of like cool technical aspects to it, but it's just like there's no way you're getting me to like stay up all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights like working on a dancing robot, right? It's like I go dancing myself, it's a little more fun. But so ours is pretty cool. I mean, we have a lot of different projects. A lot of the projects are very relevant from faculty or from industry. There's a lot of faculty involvement, a lot of industry involvement. So I think our senior design programs overall is pretty strong. But I think there's a lot of areas for improvement, and with coronavirus and the budget cuts, right? I mean, it makes sustaining these programs very difficult. So a lot of our work these days is how can we maintain kind of that quality while with half the budget and not meeting in person, right? It's like, so it's a challenge these days, but
I think we're having like 10-person teams now, right? Are they still doing that?
In the computer science, they are. I mean,
computer science.
In mechanical and electrical, the faculty all took a 50% pay cut associated with doing senior design, not their regular salaries. So they're not that generous, but but yeah, so then we ended up cutting a lot of the money that was going to faculty advising the projects, which is tough. I mean, because that means, faculty use that so they didn't have to teach quite as much, and that gave them more time to really be involved in the project, right? So part of doing that kind of just means, faculty are now going to have less time to commit to the project. In the end, maybe it's not necessarily a generosity thing or anything like that at all. It's really just now they're just not going to have as much time. So you have to figure out ways to be more efficient. But yeah, so it's definitely a tough time in the school system these days, but
yeah, so I mean, we got kicked off of campus. How are they going to do the projects? I mean, if are the students going to be maybe like temporarily allowed to go back on campus, or do you know anything about how senior design is going to work in these times?
Yeah, I mean, for Cal State LA, you know, even the different CSUs in LA are different, right? It's very each administration, you know, presidents, provosts, vice presidents, those folks each have a different approach. And so ours is maybe slightly on the conservative side, but we're in an area where COVID-19 has hit us really hard, right? So it's understandable.
Do you think students are like not going to be able to go on campus for the entire year?
My best guess is definitely not fall, but we're making a big effort to figure out how can we bring the students for senior design on campus in the spring to do some of that, just because I think, you know, the big thing about senior design is like you've done a lot of design projects and a lot of technical analysis already, right? The big part about senior design is, all right, like understanding how that analysis relates to its actual performance, and then, you know, being able to measure something about the performance and make changes and analyze those differences. Say that again, Krystal.
Like on a real physical model.
Yeah. And even, I guess, you know, like CS maybe doesn't have to, it's, you know, it doesn't, for us, it is typically, we're something that interacts with the world or interacts with a human, you know. But yeah, just in terms of like, you actually kind of, you make something and you actually see how well does this actually satisfy the need. And of course it never does perfectly. So then it's like, all right, how do we make it better, right? And so that kind of critical thinking is like really essential, and you don't really do it anywhere else, right? The other stuff, you do your design project, you turn it in, and you hope you get an A, right? It's like there's no really like, all right,
building and testing.
Yeah, there's no like, you know, validation, there's no testing.
Like
so it's really a unique experience that for the most part for ME and EE require a lot of, you know, actually making it. Very few kind of ME and EE projects that in the end aren't physical. Not to say that there aren't any, but
you mentioned
we're gonna try and get them back. We're gonna try our darndest. We'll see how, hopefully things taper off a little bit. That'll help us out. But so far,
how do you feel that affecting Baja? Because I mean, the whole project scheme is relatively similar to senior design. How do you see it affecting this year?
It's tough. I think there's no sugarcoating on it. It takes away a lot of the tools that you have at your disposal, you know, as a team. And so I think it's there's some stuff where you can kind of like, all right, you know, let's turn a disaster into something that can be useful or something, you know. But I think a lot of this aspect is it's going to be hard on the teams. And I think it's a little bit of, you know, trying to weather the storm. I think a lot of it for me is like, at least if I, you know, my kind of thought about the teams is, you know, keep the team intact, basically, right? You know, like a big part of and we'll probably talk about this more later, but about being a successful team is like continually learning and transferring that knowledge, maintaining your organization, right? Like those are maybe the most important, right? So it's like, all right, like this is going to be a tough year. Like it's really tough because we used to be kind of like family. We just saw each other all the time. We did everything. We did our homework together, right? Like we ate lunch together, right?
Well, you didn't do any homework, fine.
Yeah, right. These kids are always asking me.
No, he did a lot of homework.
He did our homework.
He did a lot of homework.
I mean, I wasn't doing it for him, but I was trying to help him through it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd probably start going on the board, start thinking about it, and then. Yeah, you're right. I didn't do that much homework, but you know, it's just a certain aspect of that where you're kind of constantly around the other people, not even necessarily working on the task, right? And that really, I think, draws you to the organization. And so I think not having that this year, and just you don't have as many just little easy tasks, right? It's like all these tasks on a computer, we have to think, and we kind of knew what the easy tasks were before. Now it's like, you gotta think, what are the new tasks we can give a new member that's like meaningful and where they learn stuff and they're contributing. You know, it's like, it's really hard, you know. It's like can't just tell them, oh, go do research on, tire slip angles or right off the bat, right? It's just like they're going to come back and be totally lost. So it's a challenge. So I think the teams just have to really be careful. They have to, really prioritize. Hopefully they'll get back to racing, but I mean, it's tough. We'll
I
see
think it'd
September
be
1st.
really interesting to hear what how other schools are coping with it. I do know that from social media and what I've seen, there are definitely actually a lot of schools that are allowing their Baja team to come back and work on the car. I think they have pretty tight restrictions, which is what you probably want to stick to. But I don't know how next year's competition is going to be, with some people being allowed back in their schools to work on the car and some people totally not having access at all. I mean, we don't have access, and it doesn't look like we're going to have it for the entire fall. And we usually kind of have our design season in the fall, so we're not typically manufacturing anyways, but it was definitely a good way to onboard people, either repair the old cars or kind of get a jump start on testing certain smaller parts of a new car, what worked, what didn't work. And it's and teaching them hey, this is where the CVT is, this is where the engine sits, this is you have a physical demonstration for new freshmen or new members of the team that you can point out physically and be this is this, now you have a better understanding of it, go do a little bit of learning on your own, right? But now it's how do you even onboard people if they've never even seen the car? That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that was a really big issue. Even last year when there was people, when you're having newer members in, you would ask them to sort of do a task, but I think the hardest part is them not being able to see the actual car in motion. So there was a push last year to get some of the cars rolling so we could have people see the car actually run, but even more so now, we can't even look at the car. We can't even look at the car.
Pull up pictures.
I can only imagine how difficult it must be to sort of push these newer students in the path of Baja, I think.
Yeah, so we're kind of probably only gonna do our recruiting through Zoom meetings and Instagram.
Yeah,
that's gonna be wild.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So September 1st, they're gonna make an announcement about comp. I expect they are not gonna run a standard comp this year.
Think they're gonna do another virtual one?
We're babysitting them. I would hope that they would, if they're not going to do a regular comp or something where you build a car and stuff, that they do something more meaningful. All right, you need to do a digital design of a vehicle, and your digital design is going to compete, right? That would that would still have meaning, right? And I would still be jazzed. I'm gonna still go beat everybody else at this, right? Whereas the virtual comp was fine. The SAE, I think, did a nice job trying to make the most out of the situation. And
do you think it's gonna level the playing field a little bit, since people can't compete a physical car?
I mean, anytime you have a drastic rule changes, it's gonna level the playing field, right? I mean, teams that have been very solid organizations with, good legacy knowledge, good team structures, they're still going to have the advantage, but their whole knowledge and structure of how they do things now needs to change like everybody else, right? So I think having drastic changes will typically, you'll see shake up the top. I mean, top teams are probably still top teams. They have great organizations, right? But you'll probably see shake up the top 30 a bit, maybe.
And plus, they're still switching to four-wheel drive, so it'd be interesting to see how that is just a whole melting pot, really, of we're switching to four-wheel drive. Things are not necessarily gonna be physical. That sounds kind of hectic. Yeah, I'm curious to see. I'm over here eating my popcorn, trying to figure out where SAE is gonna go.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, because I mean, you're right about some schools are back, right? If you're in a state that has, a state and a school that just has different priorities and different risks, right? The approach could be very different. My attitude a little bit is I'd rather go race handicap than not go race at all if possible. but I don't even know if racing is possible in the spring, right? But and so it's just also leaves a, I don't know, I think they don't want to, I mean, it's kind of stressful for a lot of the teams if they don't know what's happening, right? So I think they also don't want to be pushing teams like ours that's not allowed back to find ways to go back, right? Like they don't want to hear like, oh, Baja team sneaks in and everyone gets very sick or anything, right? Like that would be really bad for them. So
I remember before we were like super in denial about getting kicked out, and we were like, yeah, we're gonna sneak in, we don't care.
Yeah.
No, but they definitely kicked us out in tears.
So yeah, I bet some money that comp is significantly different this year.
I mean, it was probably, in my eyes, probably more pushed towards a virtual comp. And I mean, you were a judge this past virtual comp. Like, how was that experience? I mean, obviously compared to last year's comp where we went all the way to road trips all the way to Rochester and raced out there. Like, how was the experience just being a judge?
The judging is definitely interesting. It's cool to see kind of the range of approaches of the different teams. I mean, it's such a cool project for engineers, and just in terms of how different some of the approaches can be and the different resources that different teams have. And so you see a lot of different approaches to the problem, which is really fun to see. Yeah, I mean, one thing I really like about them, and one thing that I was really shocked by, is just how interesting even these kind of like mini vehicle designs are. Basically, like it is a totally, I would use the term like super over constrained problem. There's like, a million different things to choose. And it's not necessarily, and a million things to trade off, right? And so there's never just one solution. There's, a ton of different solutions, which makes the problem very, very interesting. And just, it's also just, it's just kind of cool. Technically, it hits so many different aspects. And so I felt like, even if it was a bad team, typically I'd learn something new, or I'd see something cool that I thought like, no one's ever tried that. No one's ever tried that before, even if maybe it wasn't the best idea. It was kind of like interesting that someone tried it, right? So I don't know. I felt like I even would learn a lot judging, and it felt good just to kind of help some of the teams do something meaningful, provide them some feedback on the obvious stuff that they could be doing better. But yeah, so it was I really liked it in general.
So one of the questions that we had was like, when you first started doing Baja and Formula, like, did you know what you were getting into?
I definitely didn't know it was going to be such an interesting aspect, and I didn't necessarily know there would be such kind of like a team aspect around it, which I think got me much more
What did you think,
engaged.
like, before ever stepping foot in the lab, before ever meeting the team? Like, what did you think in your mind that you were gonna have to do?
I was gonna have to do.
Did you think
there was a lot of political
at 3:00 on Tuesdays? Did you?
Yeah, I didn't think I'd be like 7 p.m. recording podcasts with the Baja thing necessarily, right? No, I mean, there was some political stuff associated with the faculty advisors early on, which was
I want to hear about that.
Oh.
I don't know how much of this you're allowed to talk about, but
yeah, I mean,
spill the beans.
I mean, it wasn't a mechanical engineering professor, and I think it was historically kind of a mechanical engineering team, and so there was some push to have a newer professor, mechanical engineering, try and push the teams, and so yeah, it was kind of interesting. I mean, originally it was like, oh, you want to advise? I was kind of like, yeah, it sounds interesting, and then figured out and then when I talked to Luis and Tony, the captains my first year, they're like, well, so when are we going to switch advisors? I was like, what do you mean switch advisors? They're like, well, we have an advisor right now. I was like, well, that's usually me. and so that was actually a lot of the like more stressing initially. I don't know. I didn't come in with a ton of expectations. I had worked in a space where UC Davis had a hybrid formula car back in the day, and so I knew kind of what the cars looked like, but I never thought in detail about the cars basically. I mean, I thought it would be easier for sure. I didn't realize just how extensive of a project it was, and just the amount of time and thought that needs to go into the organization and the technical side as well. So that made it very interesting to me, because it was just like, I still learn a ton anytime I go and talk to someone about it, or read a new book or article about it. So it's kind of cool that way.
I would be really interested to hear what different levels of involvement other teams have for their advisors. I know some people say like their advisors actually do like a lot of the work and the students kind of just build a car, and there's people who like their advisor was like how ours used to be, where they're kind of uninvolved and it's super student led, so they don't have too much involvement. And I feel like we're kind of in between now, in the sense that like the students do a lot of the work, but you are pretty involved, like you're super involved in like guiding us through kind of how like we evaluate the car, how we test the car and all that stuff. But now like you even go to competitions with us and stay up super late working on the car when we have failures, or like getting ready for competition. Like you're there sometimes sometimes like we're working on the car like overnight, right? So like, did you ever think that that's where you were going to be with the team?
No, I maybe not originally. I mean, I think that's just part of like the team aspect, right? It's like, all right, if you're going to be an important part of the team, right? Like you need to be sacrificing or putting in the time that everyone else on the team is, right? Otherwise it's just like, I don't feel it's appropriate for me to really give you a, if you're asking for an opinion or something like that, I'll be happy to help. But it's like, I don't really shouldn't have that much say if it's really all of your labor and work that's going into it. So I kind of at least try and put in the time and effort to match what the students are doing. That way you're just kind of you're seen as an actual member of the team, and like rightfully so, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of odd in that way, where it's like if someone else is up and working, like they're not going to, I'm not going to bed before them, and I'm not waking up after them. Like that's not going to happen. So it's like they're up thinking about it, I'll be up thinking about it, So I don't know. That's I mean, maybe just a little bit of like a quirk about me.
Competition for best advisor with other schools.
Yeah. But you kind of back to your other question about yeah, it's definitely a fine line between like, all right, you want the team to do well, but really your first priority is everyone learns a lot, right? So I think early on I was much more like, all right, like I want to win, I'll try and be more hands-on and stuff like that. And I think I've gone more to the point where it's like, all right, I want to set up the team in a way that they can learn a lot basically. And if the car falls apart on the last lap, and it's really sad, it's like, but as long as we've learned a lot, I'd prefer that outcome over placing well even, So but in terms of, I think in general, most teams have more hands-off advisors. And like I think like you think like, oh, I'm probably like middle ground. I think it's like I'm probably like on the extreme hands-on.
Yeah, I don't think you're middle ground. Yeah, I don't think anyone thinks you're middle ground.
I mean,
I meant more in the terms of like how much work gets done by the advisor. Like there are totally some advisors who are like totally gone, and like they don't ever step foot in the lab. And then there's, like I said, there's advisors who like pretty much do all the legwork, and the students just manufacture it or build it. Yeah. But no, as far as like actually like spending physical and like emotional time with the team, like no, you spend a lot of time with us building and advising.
Totally. No, and I think Krystal, you probably have some of the experience from like previous Cal State LA advisors or projects where it was basically like the professors weren't doing like that much outside research. It was like, all right, you're teaching, and your other job is like making sure this car gets built, like the Solar Eagle and stuff, right? Back in the day. where it's
Mm,
basically faculty and like staff that were doing a lot of the design and some of the manufacturing, right?
I don't know too much actually
About
about
that.
the other teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. Like Solar Eagle ended a long time ago. That was like before our time. It was. I think they only competed for like 3 years, didn't they?
They went off and on. Like they did, I think they did Solar Eagle 1, Solar Eagle 2, and
I
I
thought
think
it was
those are
only
both
three.
like 3-year comps. But yeah,
Uh,
so I think, and we've had staff members that have been like really active in the design and build in the previous, and so, but I think that's pretty rare. I think for the most part, I don't think there's much faculty or staff doing design work, or there's maybe a lot of staff maybe doing some manufacturing for the teams, but I think in general that's pretty rare. And I think a lot of the teams are looking for having more advisor input, not so much technically, just because not that many advisors like actually know the details of, these cars have their own peculiarities besides even just principles that govern, regular vehicles. But I think just in terms of your political clout as a team on campus, it's important to have a advisor that's going to fight that your budget doesn't get cut, fight that you're not going to take your space, right? Make sure you have what you need to be able to go to comp and stuff, right? I think there's a lot of roadblocks that it's easy for an advisor to kind of cut through. That's difficult for a student to cut through.
would you say that that's like probably the biggest challenge of like being an advisor on the team, or is there something that's like, what's the hardest part about being an advisor for SAE?
Hardest part.
Not getting sleep.
That's a good question.
Not sleep.
Yeah, during comp at least, but
Excuse me.
I mean, it's not that hard. I don't think, but it's I mean, I guess the hardest part is advising the students on creating a good organizational structure, right? I think it's not something you learn early on, really, right? How to make an organization that runs well and continues to learn new things and continues to retain that, constantly. Especially too, you're doing that with people who aren't there that long, right? And have different levels of interest. It's not like you're doing it at a company where everyone's paid to be there 8 hours a day, right? And so I think kind of like teaching that and having that done is kind of the harder part of it. I think also too, just understanding where your student's coming from is sometimes tough, right? Like, I don't know. I think as an outsider, you forget how long it takes to do everything right, and so you're just like, how come you just didn't like make this perfect? Like you made this mistake. How come you didn't just completely remake it, right? Like how did you not know this thing or something, right? It's like I think kind of managing your expectations, I think is definitely like something you have to work and like continue to think about, like, what's in the best interest of the student. I think is kind of sometimes like a tough thing, especially, it's like you've been on the team a while, right? Like you have your PhD, it's just like pretty easy to like forget what it's like to actually be a student and to be doing this as a volunteer, right?
Yeah.
Like I noticed that with a lot of like alums and staff and like other people. It's like, how come this thing, like, how come you don't have all these really like intense processes and design reviews and all this stuff in place? It's like, they're volunteers. They're doing this after school for a couple hours, right? Like this isn't gonna, look like Northrop Grumman, sending a satellite up into space or something, right? It doesn't mean we can't help the students get there, but we need to like manage our expectations a little bit. And in such a highly competitive environment is kind of the hard part, right? We all want to do so well to be able to kind of manage that is tough. I mean, I have some experience with that though, with like playing sports in college and our teams, right? Like, we're not like some division one sport, right? Like I had players who grew up playing in prep school on the East Coast and were going back and they wanted to get a med school degree. So they're playing. So, these like phenom players and other people that had learned how to play like, last year or something like that. Right. And so it's like, if all I cared about was winning, I would skate the best players to death. Even when they were tired, they were 10 times better than a fresh player who never played before. Right. But it's like, that wasn't really the purpose, right? And so you had to learn how to balance these competing interests, basically. And so yeah, I had like a little bit of experience that. I definitely messed it up a few times for sure too. But because I was a very competitive person, right? So my leaning was to like win at all costs. But yeah, you can find a balance.
What do you think has been the most fun or like the best part of being an advisor?
Oh, definitely hanging out with everybody. I mean, like I don't know, like just kind of making good personal relationships with people, right? It's just I like when I think back about Baja, like I don't remember any of the designs, right? It's like, oh, I remember the people and I remember the moments, right? I remember stuff just like being in the car. So that's the stuff I remember. Juan like got me into iration, right? I remember those like car rides. I was like
Oh yeah.
really loving irations for the first time. Yeah, those are like the moments you really remember and really
Having
enjoy.
pizza, deep dish pizza in Chicago.
Yeah, you guys did all that without me. They didn't let me on that long trip with all of you. Yeah, I mean, I remember our first year, Krystal, we were up like all night trying to get those dang Arduino boards to work.
Yeah,
Life.
the first day of comp, when we got there in Rochester, like in the hotel, still working on stuff,
Yeah.
troubleshooting. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Well, it wasn't fun at the time, but looking back, it was fun.
Yeah, that's good. There's so many kind of good moments like that, which I think that's the same with everything, right? And in grad school, like, I just wrote my advisor and one of my colleagues the other day, and it was like, I didn't really remember that much like technical stuff that we did and stuff, but I kind of just remember like the good moments and spending time together a little bit and just the stuff you kind of like, you learn from the other people. That's totally the case for me, at least.
Speaking of that, like, what was your favorite competition moment or your favorite competition in general?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot at that first competition.
Oregon?
I mean, in Oregon, but I wouldn't if I had to choose a comp. If I had to choose a comp to do again, it definitely wouldn't be that one. I mean, if I had to say, like, California was great, right? Like, we had all our families there. We had a bunch of alums.
Yeah, we had a lot of people that were able to come out because it was so close to the school.
I mean, we were doing well, right? I mean,
yeah.
We hadn't placed in the top 25 and since early 2000s or something, right? So we got over that hump during that comp. Some people like gave us some nightmares for getting to show up to sales and stuff, but overall, I think it was okay.
Yeah, right. All right.
I still remember Juan called me. I was like, just get out of the makerspace. He was like, hey, Bachman, I kind of messed up. We messed up the time on the sales presentation, and I was not very happy. I was like, oh my god, we have spent so many hours going to this comp to miss miss a whole 50 points. So it took me like a good like 3 or 4 hours to put that in perspective, right? Like right now, do I really care at all that we did that, right? Like it wouldn't have made it makes no difference.
I forgot about that.
At this point.
So it was a team effort, right? It was collaborative, right? We all messed up the time, right? But
it's supposed to be a team effort when we do good, and all on the leaders when we do bad. No, but the funny part was because Juan felt so bad about it, and that was the year that he had this really weird lineup situation to get in line for tech because it was like this long gate and all these cars lined up, but you could run to the line before you could actually get there in a car, basically. Usually the gates, it's a pretty long distance, and so typically you're just in line with the cars, right? And it's the first cars that are getting there. But I remember that year, Juan like took off like a madman, and I think we were first in line for tech because he was so mad that he had missed the thing the day before. So it ended up working out well because I think we got an early line in tech. We got everything done first day, and I think we were first in line. This was like a Sergio moment. We were first in line for hill climb, remember? And Michigan, they accidentally opened the gate, and Michigan went out to the mountain, basically, where you weren't supposed to be at that moment. And so they got kicked out of there, and we were sitting there right first in line. And remember, they tried to back into the front of the it was already 30 in line, and then they tried to back into the front. And I was like, what do you guys think you're doing? They're like, oh, we were like already over there. Like, it's like, that's not how Baja works. Like, that's not what the line is. If you go line up in the wrong spot, that does not save your spot in the line. But and so, but they were good.
I remember people were trying to pass us because, like, I think Juan like didn't have his gear on or something. I don't know what we were doing.
That was Rafa.
It was I think it was Edgar, because I think we totally messed up because we wanted to change the tune on the CV, the clocking on the helical spring on the secondary for a hill climb, and we hadn't done it the night before. Classic lesson: don't put the car away until you are ready to roll it out for the first event the next day. And so we're in line, got the car jacked up, and he's putting the CVT back on. And all of a sudden they open the gate, like no warning, you know. It was like 10, 20 minutes early. And like everyone just starts passing us. So we go from first to like third in line. And it was weird. Like, Rafa didn't have the big thing was Rafa didn't have his gear on, so we couldn't fire up the car.
Yeah, he was like still putting on gloves and wrist restraints and stuff.
Yeah. So that was definitely a lesson learned. Have that all sorted out beforehand. Probably could have predicted that, but it was like 20 minutes early, right? But that's classic Baja. Like, you got to be prepared for anything, right? Like, anything could start at any time. You can't just complain that, it's supposed to start at 10, they opened the gate at 5 minutes early and you didn't get there. It's like, should have predicted that was a potential thing that would happen, because anything's possible. So I like that aspect.
Right. So considering like all the stresses that happens when you're going to comp, and you know, you're the advisor for like a lot of different teams at school too, like even including senior design, even though that's not as much as like a competition team. I don't know if you want to answer this question, but like, which team is your favorite?
Thank you for listening to the Staying Muddy podcast. I'm Lizard, giving you a little bit of info at the end of Bachman's episode. His part 2 will come out 2 weeks from when this airs. If you like what we do, join our subreddit Staying Muddy Podcast, or if you'd like to learn more about our team, visit our website, Krystal Baja SAE, or follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn with the same handle, Krystal Baja SAE. Thanks again for listening. See ya!
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Staying Muddy podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Baja SAE and Cal State Los Angeles.